It was a typical Monday morning in the courtroom, and the air was thick with tension. The judge, a seasoned woman in her mid-40s, sat at the bench, her eyes scanning the papers in front of her. Her sharp gaze flickered briefly over to the defendant, a man in his late 30s, dressed in an unremarkable gray suit, looking almost too ordinary for someone facing serious charges. His hands were clasped together, and his posture was rigid, but there was something about him that seemed out of place in the chaos of the courtroom. She had been dismissing cases all morning. And now, with barely a glance in his direction, she did the same. The defendant's expression was unreadable, almost as if he had anticipated the outcome. "Mr. Davis," she said, her voice sharp, "your case is closed for the day. I don't need any further arguments from you. We'll reconvene tomorrow. You're free to go." The defendant nodded politely, stood up, and left the courtroom with an almost imperceptible smirk on his face. She watched him walk out, dismissing him from her mind as quickly as she had dismissed his case. But there was one thing she didn't know: this man wasn't just any defendant. He had been a key figure in the department she had overseen for years, but not in the way she might think. Later that afternoon, the judge sat in her chambers, reviewing the rest of the day's cases. She was preparing to leave for the evening when a soft knock interrupted her concentration. It was one of the court clerks, holding a file. "Judge Matthews, you have a visitor," the clerk said with a neutral expression. "It's urgent. He says he's from Internal Affairs." She raised an eyebrow. Internal Affairs? She had never seen someone from that division in her courtroom before. With a slight frown, she motioned for him to come in. A tall man in his late 30s stepped inside. He wore a dark suit with a perfectly pressed shirt. His eyes were calm, yet there was a subtle intensity in them, like a man who was always watching, always calculating. "Good evening, Judge Matthews," he said, offering a firm handshake. "I'm Agent Davis. I oversee Internal Affairs." The judge froze for a split second, her mind racing. She had heard of him before. She had no idea he was the Davis, the man she had just dismissed in court that morning. She started, trying to piece together her thoughts. "You're Mr. Davis from the case this morning?" He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yes, Judge. That was me." She couldn't help but feel a twinge of embarrassment. She had dismissed him so easily, not knowing who he truly was. The weight of the moment hung in the air, but he didn't seem to hold any ill will. In fact, his expression remained composed, almost like he had expected her to react this way. "I need to speak with you about something serious," he continued. "It's about your court proceedings." Her heart skipped a beat. Something about the way he spoke made her instantly alert. The tension in the room grew as Agent Davis remained standing, his posture unshaken and calm. The judge took a seat at her desk, motioning for him to sit across from her. He did, folding his hands neatly in front of him. "Is this about the case today?" she asked, trying to mask the unease in her voice. Davis didn't immediately respond. Instead, he glanced at the file the clerk had handed her earlier. It was clear he had already looked through it. "Not just the case today, Judge Matthews. It's about your role here and the bigger picture. There are things happening behind the scenes, things that have been overlooked." She leaned forward slightly, her professional demeanor firmly in place. "What exactly are you talking about, Agent Davis?" His eyes shifted slightly, as if weighing his next words carefully. "There's a pattern emerging within your courtroom, a pattern of decisions that aren't exactly by the book. Some of them, I suspect, are influenced by certain external pressures." The judge's mind raced. She had always prided herself on being impartial, fair, and unwavering in her decisions. But now, in the face of his quiet accusation, doubt began to creep in. What did he mean by external pressures? Was he suggesting there was corruption within the system? "Are you implying that I've been swayed or compromised in some way?" she asked, her voice steady but with an edge of defensiveness. He shook his head, but there was no comfort in the gesture. Not directly. But someone else may be. Someone who has access to your decisions, someone who has access to the whole system. His words hung in the air. The judge felt her pulse quicken. She had no idea where this conversation was heading, but it was becoming clear that Agent Davis wasn't just here for a friendly chat. Who are you suggesting? She pressed, her voice sharper now. Davis met her gaze with an intensity that made her feel like he was seeing right through her. The person you dismissed this morning. Mr. Davis, the one you thought was just another defendant. He's been overseeing internal affairs for years. And I'm afraid there's more to his involvement with this court than anyone realizes. The judge's stomach dropped. She had no idea what she had just done. The judge's mind swirled with confusion and disbelief. She had dismissed the man from court without a second thought, thinking he was just another ordinary defendant in a sea of cases. But now, the walls felt like they were closing in on her. Internal affairs. Oversaw the department. She tried to steady her breath, but it was becoming harder to keep up with the sudden turn of events. Are you telling me he's been watching me? She asked, her voice low, edged with frustration. How could I not know something like that? Agent Davis's expression remained unchanged. The system is larger than most realize. People in positions of power often oversee more than they let on. And Mr. Davis, he's not just a figurehead. He's tied to much more than internal affairs. He's got connections. Strong ones. The judge felt a sinking feeling in her gut, as if the ground beneath her was no longer as solid as it once seemed. So, what now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Are you suggesting I'm under investigation? Davis leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. No, Judge Matthews. Not you, at least not directly. But you were unknowingly involved in something bigger than you could have imagined. The people you trust, the people who have access to this courtroom, he has connections to them. And those connections have been affecting the way cases are decided. Especially ones involving certain individuals. Her heart raced as she tried to process what he was saying. Are you saying that decisions I've made were manipulated? Davis didn't respond immediately. He simply let the weight of his silence settle between them. Finally, he spoke, his tone even but laden with purpose. The influence isn't always direct, Judge. But it's there. And it's been there for a while. A cold shiver ran down her spine. The thought that she could have unknowingly been a part of something corrupt, even if it wasn't by her own design, made her sick to her stomach. She had always been a person of principle, believing in justice above all else. Why didn't you just come to me sooner? She asked, her voice rising slightly in frustration. Why didn't you tell me this from the start? Davis paused, his eyes not leaving hers. Because, Judge Matthews, people like Mr. Davis don't make themselves known unless it serves their interests. And he didn't need you to know. He just needed you to play your part. The words hung in the air, their implications far more dangerous than anything she could have anticipated. A thick silence hung in the room as the weight of Agent Davis's words settled in. The judge leaned back in her chair, trying to steady her racing thoughts. She had always prided herself on being above reproach, on making decisions based purely on the law and the facts before her. The idea that someone, especially someone like Mr. Davis, could manipulate the system from the shadows was a bitter pill to swallow. You're telling me that my decisions, the very rulings I've made in my courtroom, could have been influenced by him? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Davis gave a short nod, his face unmoved. Not just influenced. If you look closely enough, you'll see a pattern. A pattern that traces back to Mr. Davis. Cases where the outcome didn't quite match the law. Cases where decisions were pushed in a certain direction, subtly, but with precision. She rubbed her temples, trying to hold it all together. How could she not have seen this before? How could she have allowed herself to be a part of something so insidious without even realizing it? Why now? She whispered. Why come to me now with all of this? Agent Davis stood up, his demeanor still calm but now carrying a deeper intensity. Because you've reached a breaking point. This isn't just about your decisions, Judge. It's about the system itself. If this continues, the integrity of your courtroom will be compromised beyond repair. And I'm afraid if we don't act fast, more people will be unknowingly dragged into this. He stepped closer to her desk, and his tone grew more urgent. The people behind this operation, they're dangerous. They've been working in the shadows, using your courtroom as one of their pawns. You didn't ask for this, but you're involved now whether you like it or not. The judge felt a cold chill creep down her spine. A part of her wanted to deny it all, to believe that she was just an innocent bystander in a corrupted system. But the reality of the situation was undeniable. She had been a part of something larger than she could have ever imagined. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice steady but with a note of desperation. She needed answers, and she needed them now. Davis's eyes softened for a moment before his resolve returned. "We need to expose the full scope of this operation. We need to gather evidence, find out how deep this goes. And most importantly, we need to ensure that no more cases are manipulated. We'll need your help to do that." The judge nodded slowly, the weight of what she was about to undertake settling over her like a heavy cloak. She had no choice now. She had to take action. "I'll help you," she said quietly. "But I want to be sure of one thing, there's no turning back from this. Once we go down this road, it's all or nothing." Agent Davis gave her a solemn nod. "I understand. And I assure you, there's no going back. But if you don't act now, you'll be complicit in a system that will continue to destroy lives. And we can't allow that to happen." The judge exhaled sharply, then straightened her back. It was time to face the storm head-on. She had to be more than just a judge now. She had to be a force of change. The judge spent the next few days in a haze of sleepless nights and constant calculations. Every decision she had made in the past year seemed to echo in her mind with growing doubt. She couldn't ignore the implications of what Davis had revealed. She had never asked to be involved in any kind of underhanded scheme, but she had to admit that something was wrong, and if she didn't act now, she might never get the chance to fix it. She sat at her desk, staring at the files Davis had given her. They were filled with case after case, some already dismissed, others still pending. The patterns Davis had spoken of were glaring now: decisions made in favor of certain individuals, cases where the evidence was ignored or manipulated, outcomes that didn't match the law. The phone on her desk buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was Davis. "Judge, it's time," his voice came through with an urgency that matched her own growing sense of panic. "We need to meet. There's something bigger happening tonight." She felt a knot form in her stomach. "What is it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "There's a hearing tonight. A high-profile case involving a political figure. We've traced the influence of Mr. Davis to this particular case. I have reason to believe that if we don't intervene now, the entire case could be dismissed under false pretenses. We need you to be there." Her pulse quickened. She had never been involved in anything like this before. She had always been in control, always had the power in her courtroom. But now she was at the mercy of a system she couldn't trust, one that had been manipulated in ways she could never have imagined. "I'll be there," she said, determination flooding her voice. "Just tell me where." The following hours passed in a blur. As the evening approached, the judge arrived at the courthouse, her mind racing. She had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed. The weight of her position had always been heavy, but now it felt crushing. Davis was waiting for her in the shadows, his face lit only by the glow of his phone. "This is it," he said quietly, handing her a small envelope. "Inside is the evidence we need. You can't afford to hesitate now." She took the envelope, feeling its weight. It contained the proof she needed to bring everything to light. She had no idea what would happen after tonight, but she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't go back. Not now. As the judge stepped into the courtroom, the air felt charged. The usual hum of voices and rustling papers was replaced by an eerie stillness. The defendant in tonight's case, a well-known political figure, sat at the front, his lawyer beside him, confident and ready for the proceedings. The judge's eyes flicked toward the man, but her focus quickly returned to the task at hand. Tonight, she wasn't just a judge, she was a catalyst for change. She took her seat at the bench, her hands steady but her mind racing. The weight of the envelope in her hands felt heavier than ever. Inside were the crucial pieces of evidence, the very things that would expose the depths of corruption that had festered for far too long. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, but she didn't look up. She couldn't afford to waver now. Agent Davis was sitting in the gallery, his eyes locked on her. His presence was a silent reminder of everything that had led to this moment. He had given her the tools to make things right. But the final decision rested with her. The prosecutor called the case forward, but the judge was distracted. Her gaze flickered to the envelope, her fingers tracing its edges. There were moments in life when everything you've worked for, everything you've believed in, came to a head. This was hers. The chance to either uphold justice or let it slip away forever. Judge Matthews, the prosecutor's voice broke through her thoughts, drawing her attention back to the present. The defendant's case is clear. He is entitled to a fair trial, and there are no grounds to dismiss this case. The words were routine, almost too rehearsed. She looked at the prosecutor for a moment longer than necessary, then turned her gaze to the defendant, who was seated with a smug look of certainty. He had been untouchable for too long, and she had the evidence to prove it. But the question now wasn't about the case, it was about the system. The entire system that had allowed this man, and others like him, to walk free. She took a deep breath, then slid the envelope open. The rustling of the paper sounded louder than it should have in the tense silence of the courtroom. Inside were documents, text exchanges, and confidential memos that clearly tied the defendant to Mr. Davis. It was enough to bring down not only this case but a series of others that had been manipulated for years. The judge stood, the decision suddenly clear. "Before we proceed," she said, her voice calm but carrying a weight that reverberated through the room, "I've just been made aware of new evidence. This case cannot move forward until it has been fully reviewed." A ripple of surprise passed through the courtroom. The defendant's lawyer shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is an unprecedented move. We have already reviewed all the evidence." "I don't care," the judge responded, her voice gaining strength. "This case is no longer about what's been presented. This is about what's been hidden. The truth will come out, and I will make sure of it." The courtroom fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. The judge could feel the eyes of everyone upon her, some waiting for her to back down, others waiting for her to make the right choice. She had crossed a line, but there was no turning back now. As she glanced once more at Davis, she saw him give her a subtle nod of approval. She was no longer just a judge. She was the reckoning. The room was still as death. Even the defendant, who had once been so sure of his victory, seemed to realize that something was shifting in the air. His confident posture had faltered slightly, and the smug expression on his face had been replaced with a growing unease. The weight of the judge's words had hit him harder than he had anticipated. The judge stood firm, feeling the shift of power in the room. She was no longer the puppet in this play. For the first time, she held the strings. "I'm granting a recess," she continued, her voice unshakable. "This case will not proceed until I have reviewed all the evidence in full. The matter of internal affairs, the misconduct in this courtroom, and the manipulation behind the scenes all need to be addressed. This court will not move forward until we've had full transparency." A murmur spread through the courtroom like wildfire. Whispers fluttered between the prosecutor, the defendant's lawyer, and even the spectators in the gallery. No one could quite believe what was happening. The weight of her decision had not only stopped the case but sent shockwaves through the entire courtroom system. As the judge turned to leave the bench, her hand still gripping the envelope, Agent Davis rose from his seat and walked up to her. His presence was calm, but there was a fire in his eyes. He had believed in her when she had doubted herself, and now it was time to see if their combined efforts would unravel the corruption that had taken root so deeply in the system. "Judge Matthews," Davis said quietly, his voice filled with admiration. "You just did the right thing. This isn't over yet, but this is the start." She nodded, feeling the enormity of the moment wash over her. It wasn't just about the case. It wasn't even just about the defendant in front of her. It was about the entire system, and she had just taken the first step toward restoring its integrity. The courtroom doors closed behind them, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the judge felt the weight of her office settle differently upon her shoulders. It wasn't a burden, it was a responsibility, one that she now carried with the full knowledge of its power. As the investigation into internal affairs began to unfold, more names would surface, more cases would be reopened, and the truth would slowly start to creep into the light. But for now, the judge knew that she had made the right choice. And as for Mr. Davis, he would soon learn that no matter how deeply embedded the corruption was, there would always be someone who would stand up to it. This was no longer just a battle in a courtroom, it was a war for justice. The reckoning had begun. And she would make sure it did not stop until the system was truly fixed.